Hello everybody and welcome back to this tutorial. And what we saw in the previous video is we took a look at the most basic stuff while using the function. So we saw how we can return something from the function. We saw how we can actually generate a function that will not return anything. So the variable will contain a none type. We also coded a simple program that is actually going to return a value specified by the actual random integer that the random library created or generated. And that is basically all we did. We also did a simple version of our own printing function just to show you how the functions work. Now, what we're going to do right now is we're going to introduce ourselves with the local and global variables in functions and outside of the functions. So, in our functions, variables are local. So, if you create a function, for example, function 1, let's say we call it, and you use a variable in that function that you actually generated in the function code itself, that variable will not be recognized outside of the function code. So let me just show you. Let me open up my idle right here. Once again, idle for Python 3, and we can use this interpreter right here. We don't need to actually code any program in this tutorial. As I said, in functions, variables are local and can be used outside. Now, variables themselves can either be either global or either local. They can't be both. Now, you can't have a variable that is going to be both global and local. Local is variable inside the function and global is variable outside of the function. So that is the most simple term you can actually remember it by. So let us see an example of using a local variable. So right here, what we are going to do is we are going to create a function. So def function 1. This function will take no arguments as an input, so just open and close brackets. And in this function, we're going to create a variable to be equal to 30. So we created some variable called variable, or let's call it number. Maybe it is confusing if I call it variable. So number equals 13. In our function, we're also going to print that number. So this is going to be our entire function. Basically, once we call it, the number will be equal to 30. And the actual print of the number, and that value will actually get printed out to the screen. So if I call it, let me show you. You call the function just by specifying its name and opening and closing brackets, and also specifying the arguments in between those brackets if they are needed. For this case, we don't need it, so we just call the function with this name, and there we got the output 30. So what we did is we created a variable in our function. We set the value to that variable to be equal to 30, and then we printed that number. Now this is an example of a local variable. It cannot be used outside of the actual function. So if I type right here number, you can see name number is not defined, even though we did define it right here. That is because I'm calling this number. If I just print it once again, if I just show you, if I try to print the number, I will get error name number is not defined, because the number is only recognized within this function right here. If you try to call it outside, it will not be recognized. Therefore, we can conclude that this is an actual local variable. So let me show you right here. If you create a global variable with the same name, so with the same name, and we set it to be equal to 40, you can see right here that we actually have in our function the number to be set to 30, and outside of our function we have the number to be set to 40. If I, after setting the number to be equal to 40, print that number, we will of course get 40 as an output, since this is a global variable and we are printing that variable there, and we get the output of 40. But if I call a function and then try to print once again number, you will see that once again it is going to be equal to 40. It didn't change its value by specifying number equals 30 in the function right when we called it. That is because these two are two entirely separate variables. They are just called the same. Basically, this one is a global number variable and this one is a local number variable. These two don't have anything to do with each other. Well, in this example right here, if we specify, for example, our function take an input using the number, then things would be different. But in this case, these two variables are basically entirely different. As you saw, this part of the code doesn't really influence the rest of the code outside of the function, so that is something that you should know. Now, in order to actually modify a global variable in a function, you need to call that variable with the global prefix. So right here we don't have any global prefix, but let us see how we can perform the same program using the global prefix. So right here we are going to, let me just restart everything. I could have used the OS library to clear, but doesn't even matter. What we're going to do right now is we're going to create the same function, so function1. It will not take any input, but right here we're going to specify that we are using a global variable number. So, and then we're going to set the number to be equal to 30 once again. We don't need to print it in this case, it's just simply, we can just simply leave it to be equal to 30. In the previous example we actually printed the number, but right now we don't have to do it. And right now, if I call this function right here, we call it, and I print the number, you can see that right now I can actually access this number outside of the function, and it is equal to 30. That is because we use the global number variable. This means that the variable that we are going to use in this function right here can also be used outside of it. Now also this means that if we change the value right now to 40 as we did in the previous video, so number equals 40, and we print the number once again, this variable and this variable are exactly the same. We are going to use this variable in the actual function1 by changing its value. So right now if I call once again the function1 and try to print the number, it will not be 40 as in the previous video. It will actually change its value right now and it will become 30. So let me show you right here. If I just call function1 and I try to print the number once again, you can see right now the value is changed and the actual value of the number is 30 and no longer 40. So this is an actual example of global and local variables. Now there is also something called parsing the variable, so let us use it like this. So def function2. Let's say for example number, or pardon me, we need to take an actual argument right here. So number, well, let's just call it number, and we're here going to use number plus equals 1. Where is my plus? Finally, I found it. So number plus equals 1. This is our entire function, but right now you can see, let me just show you right here, that this is not an actual global variable. We didn't specify the global prefix anywhere. So if we set the number to be equal to actually 30, and we print that number, and then we call the function2 for that number, and then we print the number once again, you can see that the number is still 30. That is because we actually didn't return anything from this function, we just increased it in the function itself. So let me show you right here. If I just, I'm not really sure if I can add it right here. Okay, and then we actually return the number. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the number variable to be equal to function2 outside of the number variable. Now we know that the number was set to be equal to 30, and right now if we print the number, it is going to be equal to 31, because we actually returned this number value to the number variable itself. Therefore it increased it by 1, and therefore right now our number variable is equal to 31. So that is basically everything we have at the moment for the global and local variables. Now make sure to practice this and really understand it, so you don't actually mess up your code once you start coding with multiple functions and multiple variables. but we're going to also take a look at that later on. For now on, this would be more than enough. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope I will see you in the next lecture. Bye!